At exactly 11:47 p.m. on Tuesday, March 15, 2023, Maria Santos was performing what seemed like the most mundane task imaginable. She was emptying the wastebasket in the corner office of the 47th floor of the Meridian Financial Tower in downtown Chicago. The building was almost completely empty. The executive floors were dark. The only sounds were the gentle hum of air conditioning and the soft wheels of her cleaning cart rolling across marble floors. Maria had been working this same route for 3 years and 4 months. Every night, she would arrive at 10 p.m. sharp, badge into the building through the service entrance, and begin her methodical journey from floor 35 to floor 50. She moved like a ghost through these halls of power, invisible to the executives who occasionally worked late, unnoticed by the security guards who knew her only as employee number 7429. But on this particular Tuesday night, as Maria reached into that corner wastebasket, her fingers brushed against something that would change the course of history for over 15,000 people. Something that would expose a conspiracy so carefully constructed, so masterfully hidden, that it had operated undetected for over 3 years. Something that would reveal the true character of a man who controlled billions of dollars but had never truly seen the woman who cleaned his office every single night. What Maria discovered in that trash can was a single crumpled piece of paper. A document that should never have been thrown away. A financial statement with numbers that told a story of systematic theft on a scale that would make international headlines. But here's what makes this story truly extraordinary. Maria Santos wasn't just a cleaner. She was a former senior financial analyst with a master's degree in international finance from Universidad Centroamericana in El Salvador. A woman whose credentials weren't recognized in the United States, whose expertise was dismissed, whose intelligence was invisible to everyone around her. As Maria smoothed out that paper under the fluorescent lights of the empty office, she realized she was looking at evidence of embezzlement totaling $47 million. Money stolen from pension funds. Money that belonged to working families. Money that, if not recovered, would force the closure of Meridian Financial within 60 days, putting 15,000 employees out of work and destroying the retirement savings of over 200,000 people. The man whose office she was cleaning, Marcus Crawford, had no idea that his most trusted advisor had been systematically robbing the company blind. He had no idea that his family's 70-year-old financial empire was on the verge of collapse. And he certainly had no idea that the quiet woman who emptied his trash every night was about to become the only person who could save everything he held dear. But here's where this story becomes even more incredible. What happened next would test everything Maria believed about justice, about courage, about what it means to do the right thing when the cost could be everything you've worked for. Because Maria faced a choice that night that would haunt her for weeks: stay silent and keep her job, or risk everything to save a company that barely acknowledged her existence. The next 48 hours would transform both of their lives forever. They would expose corruption at the highest levels of corporate America. They would challenge every assumption about who has value in our society and whose voice deserves to be heard. And they would prove that sometimes the most powerful person in the room is the one everyone assumes has no power at all. This is the true story of Maria Santos and Marcus Crawford. This is the story of how a night shift cleaner became the unlikely hero in one of the most dramatic corporate scandals of the decade. This is the story of courage, betrayal, redemption, and the extraordinary things that happen when we finally start seeing the people who have been invisible all along. Narrator continues with slight shift in tone, more direct and engaging. Before we start this incredible story, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment, and let us know where you're watching from around the world. Your engagement helps us bring you more amazing true stories like this one. Now, let's begin at the very beginning, with a woman who would change everything. Maria Elena Santos was born in San Salvador, El Salvador, on September 3, 1981. She was the eldest of 4 children in a family where education was considered the pathway to a better life. Her father, Roberto, worked as a mechanic. Her mother, Carmen, cleaned houses for wealthy families in the capital city. Both parents worked multiple jobs to ensure their children could attend university. Maria excelled in mathematics from an early age. Her teachers recognized her analytical mind, her ability to see patterns others missed, her natural understanding of complex financial concepts. By age 16, She was tutoring university students in advanced calculus. By 20, she had earned her bachelor's degree in economics with highest honors. By 24, she had completed her master's degree in international finance and was working as a senior analyst for Banco Agricola, one of El Salvador's largest financial institutions. For 6 years, Maria built a reputation as one of the most skilled financial investigators in the country. She specialized in detecting irregularities in large-scale transactions. She could spot fraudulent patterns in spreadsheets that other analysts would overlook. Her supervisors relied on her expertise to verify the integrity of multi-million-dollar deals. She was respected, well compensated, and building toward a future that seemed secure and prosperous. But in 2014, everything changed. Political instability in El Salvador was escalating. Gang violence was reaching unprecedented levels. The country was becoming increasingly dangerous for families with young children. Maria's daughter, Elena, was only 8 years old, and Maria made the heartbreaking decision that millions of parents have made throughout history. She would leave everything behind to give her child a safer future. The journey to the United States took Maria and Elena 3 months. They traveled through Guatemala, through Mexico, facing dangers and hardships that would break most people's spirits. When they finally reached Chicago in early 2015, Maria had less than $300 in cash, a suitcase of clothes, and a folder containing all her academic credentials and professional certifications. What Maria discovered in America was both a blessing and a crushing disappointment. Yes, she and Elena were safe. Yes, there were opportunities here that didn't exist back home. But Maria also discovered that her master's degree meant nothing to American employers. Her 6 years of professional experience were dismissed as irrelevant. Her expertise in international finance was ignored completely. For 8 months, Maria applied for positions in her field. She submitted over 200 applications to banks, investment firms, accounting companies, and financial consulting agencies. She received exactly 4 interviews and 0 job offers. The feedback was always the same. Her education wasn't from an accredited American institution. Her experience wasn't with American financial systems. Her English, while fluent, carried an accent that some employers found distracting. By October 2015, with her savings nearly depleted and Elena needing school supplies and winter clothes, Maria made a decision that broke her heart but kept her family afloat. She took a job with Midwest Cleaning Solutions, a commercial cleaning company that serviced office buildings throughout downtown Chicago. The pay was $11 per hour. The schedule was 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., Sunday through Thursday. The work was physically demanding and often thankless. But Maria approached this job with the same dedication she had brought to analyzing multi-million-dollar financial transactions. She showed up early every night. She performed every task with meticulous attention to detail. She learned the routines and preferences of every executive whose office she cleaned. And most importantly, she never complained, never showed resentment, never let anyone see how much it hurt to use her Harvard-level analytical skills to empty wastebaskets and vacuum carpets. For 3 years and 4 months, Maria Santos remained invisible in the halls of Meridian Financial. The executives passed her in the hallways without making eye contact. The security guards knew her badge number but not her name. The other cleaning staff respected her work ethic but had no idea about her educational background or professional expertise. Maria had become a ghost in a world of power and wealth, a highly skilled professional trapped in a role that utilized none of her talents. But sometimes, being invisible gives you access to secrets that visible people never discover. Sometimes, being underestimated means you can see things that others miss completely. And on that Tuesday night in March, when Maria's fingers touched that crumpled piece of paper in Marcus Crawford's wastebasket, her invisibility was about to become the most powerful weapon in a battle to save thousands of jobs and expose a conspiracy that reached the very top of American corporate power. 47 floors above the streets of Chicago, in an office decorated with 3 generations of family photographs and awards, Marcus Daniel Crawford was working late again. It was 11:15 p.m., and he was staring at financial reports that told a story he couldn't quite understand. Revenue was down 18% from the previous quarter. Client retention rates were dropping faster than his analysts could explain. Stock prices had fallen 23% in 6 months. The company his grandfather built from nothing was hemorrhaging money, and Marcus couldn't figure out why. Marcus Crawford was 38 years old, the third-generation CEO of Meridian Financial, a company founded by his grandfather, Thomas Crawford, in 1953. Thomas had started with a single desk in a rented office above a bakery on State Street, offering bookkeeping services to local businesses. Through 7 decades of growth, strategic acquisitions, and careful management, the Crawford family had built Meridian into one of the most respected financial services companies in the Midwest. When Marcus was growing up, Sunday dinners at the Crawford estate were filled with stories about the company's history. His grandfather would tell him about the early days, when Thomas personally knew every client and could remember their children's names and birthdays. His father, Robert Crawford, would share lessons about the importance of integrity in business, about treating employees like family, about building something that would last beyond their own lifetimes. Marcus had always known he would inherit this legacy. From the time he was 12 years old, he spent summers working in different departments at Meridian. He started in the mailroom, moved to data entry, worked as a junior analyst, and gradually learned every aspect of the business. He earned his MBA from Northwestern's Kellogg School of Management, not because he needed the credentials, but because he wanted to bring fresh ideas and modern strategies to the family company. When Marcus became CEO in 2018, at the age of 33, Meridian Financial was thriving. The company managed over $4 billion in assets, employed 15,000 people across 12 states, and had a reputation for conservative, reliable financial management. Marcus had big plans for expansion, for embracing new technologies, for growing the company while maintaining the family values that had made it successful. But by early 2023, something was terribly wrong. The numbers didn't make sense. Profitable clients were leaving without explanation. Investment strategies that had worked for decades were suddenly underperforming. Marcus was working 16-hour days, attending emergency board meetings, and fielding increasingly difficult questions from investors and employees who were watching their retirement accounts shrink month after month. What Marcus didn't know was that his most trusted advisor, Chief Financial Officer David Chen, had been systematically embezzling money from the company for over 3 years. Chen had joined Meridian in 2019, coming from a prestigious position at Goldman Sachs with impeccable credentials and glowing recommendations. He was brilliant, charming, and seemed completely dedicated to the company's success. Marcus had grown to rely on Chen not just as a financial advisor, but as a friend and confidant. The embezzlement scheme was sophisticated beyond anything law enforcement had seen before. Chen had created a network of shell companies with names that sounded legitimate: Midwest Investment Partners, Prairie Capital Management, Great Lakes Financial Consulting. These fake companies would submit invoices for services that were never provided, consultations that never happened, and management fees for non-existent projects. The amounts were always just small enough to avoid triggering automatic reviews, but large enough to accumulate into millions of dollars over time. Chen had also manipulated the company's investment portfolio, steering funds toward high-risk ventures that he secretly controlled. When these investments inevitably failed, the losses appeared to be bad luck rather than deliberate fraud. He had falsified reports, altered spreadsheets, and created fake documentation that made his theft virtually undetectable through normal auditing processes. By March 2023, Chen had stolen over $47 million from Meridian Financial. This money had come from employee pension funds, client investment accounts, and the company's operational reserves. The theft was so carefully orchestrated that even the company's external auditors hadn't detected any irregularities during their annual reviews. Marcus Crawford, despite his business education and years of experience, had no idea that his company was being robbed. He trusted Chen completely. When financial performance declined, Marcus blamed market conditions. When clients left, he assumed it was due to competitive pressure. When employees asked difficult questions about their retirement accounts, Marcus relied on Chen's explanations and reassurances. The irony was devastating. Marcus Crawford, who prided himself on knowing his employees and caring about their welfare, was completely blind to both the theft that was destroying their financial security and the expertise of the woman who cleaned his office every night. He would nod politely to Maria when their paths crossed in the hallway, but he had never learned her name, never asked about her background, never imagined that she possessed the exact skills needed to uncover the fraud that was destroying his family's legacy. Marcus was a good man trapped in a terrible situation he didn't understand. He was losing sleep, losing weight, and losing hope as he watched everything his family had built slowly collapse around him. The board of directors was growing impatient. Major investors were demanding explanations he couldn't provide. There were rumors that a hostile takeover was being planned, that the Crawford family might lose control of the company they had spent 70 years building. On that Tuesday night in March, as Marcus sat in his office reviewing reports that showed another month of declining performance, he was considering options that would have been unthinkable just 2 years earlier. Should he sell the company to a larger corporation? Should he lay off thousands of employees to cut costs? Should he step down as CEO and let someone else try to save what remained of Meridian Financial? What Marcus didn't know was that 47 floors below, in the service entrance of his building, Maria Santos was arriving for her night shift with the same dedication she had shown for over 3 years. He didn't know that she had noticed patterns in the documents that crossed his desk, inconsistencies in the financial reports she saw while cleaning his office, irregularities that her trained eye had been cataloging for months. He didn't know that the solution to his company's crisis was arriving every night at 10 p.m. sharp, carrying a mop and a bucket, invisible to everyone who had the power to save the 15,000 jobs that hung in the balance. But in less than an hour, Maria Santos would make a discovery that would change both of their lives forever. And Marcus Crawford would learn that sometimes the most important person in the room is the one you never thought to notice. At 11:43 p.m., Marcus Crawford finally closed his laptop and rubbed his tired eyes. The financial reports he had been studying offered no answers, only more questions about why his company was failing. He gathered the papers scattered across his mahogany desk, crumpled up several draft memos he had written and discarded, and tossed them into the wastebasket beside his chair. Among those discarded papers was a document that should never have been thrown away. It was a preliminary audit report that David Chen had given him earlier that day, claiming it was an outdated draft that had been superseded by newer data. Marcus had glanced at it briefly, noticed some numbers that seemed inconsistent with other reports, but trusted Chen's explanation that it contained errors and should be disregarded. What Marcus didn't realize was that this draft report was actually the most accurate financial analysis Meridian had produced in 3 years. It had been prepared by an external consulting firm that Chen had hired and then quickly dismissed when their investigation began uncovering irregularities in the company's accounts. The report contained clear evidence of the systematic theft that was destroying the company, but Chen had convinced Marcus it was unreliable and should be ignored. As Marcus turned off his office lights and headed toward the elevator, he passed Maria Santos in the hallway. She was pushing her cleaning cart toward his office, just as she had done every Tuesday night for over 3 years. Marcus nodded politely and said, "Good evening," just as he always did. Maria smiled and replied, "Good evening, Mr. Crawford," just as she always did. Neither of them had any idea that this brief, polite exchange would be the last normal interaction they would ever have. Marcus left the building at 11:52 p.m., driving home to his suburban mansion where his wife and 2 children were already asleep. He would spend another sleepless night worrying about the company's future, wondering if he was the Crawford who would finally fail to protect the family legacy. Meanwhile, Maria entered his office and began her methodical cleaning routine. She emptied the wastebaskets, dusted the furniture, vacuumed the carpet, and cleaned the windows that looked out over the glittering lights of Chicago. It was while she was emptying the wastebasket beside Marcus's desk that her fingers touched the crumpled audit report that would change everything. Maria had learned to be careful with confidential documents. Part of her training at Midwest Cleaning Solutions emphasized the importance of discretion when working in executive offices. She was supposed to empty wastebaskets without examining their contents, to treat all discarded papers as confidential material that should be disposed of immediately. But as Maria lifted the crumpled papers from Marcus's wastebasket, one of them partially unfolded, and she caught sight of a familiar financial term that made her pause. The document contained a balance sheet with numbers that seemed dramatically inconsistent with other financial reports she had noticed on Marcus's desk in recent weeks. Maria's analytical mind, trained through years of detecting financial irregularities, immediately recognized that something was wrong. The numbers on this discarded report showed a completely different picture of Meridian's financial health than the official reports she had seen Marcus reviewing night after night. For a moment, Maria stood frozen in Marcus Crawford's empty office, holding a piece of paper that contained evidence of either a massive accounting error or deliberate financial fraud. Her training as a cleaning woman told her to throw the paper away and forget what she had seen. Her instincts as a mother told her to avoid getting involved in problems that weren't her responsibility. But her expertise as a financial analyst told her that she was looking at evidence of a crime that could destroy the livelihoods of 15,000 people. Maria carefully smoothed out the crumpled document and read it again under the fluorescent lights of the empty office. The numbers told a story of systematic financial manipulation, of money being diverted from legitimate accounts into questionable investments, of audit procedures being circumvented through sophisticated accounting tricks. As she studied the document more carefully, Maria realized she was looking at evidence of embezzlement on a scale that would make national headlines. Someone with access to Meridian's financial systems had been stealing money for years, covering their tracks through a complex web of fake transactions and falsified reports. The woman who had been invisible in these halls of power for over 3 years suddenly found herself holding the key to saving the company that barely acknowledged her existence. Maria Santos, former senior financial analyst, current night shift cleaner, was about to become the most important person in a drama that would expose corruption at the highest levels of American business. But first, she had to decide what to do with the knowledge that could either save 15,000 jobs or cost her the only employment she had been able to find in America. The choice she made in the next few minutes would test everything she believed about justice, courage, and the responsibility we have to protect others even when no one is protecting us. Maria Santos stood alone in Marcus Crawford's office at 12:17 a.m., holding a document that could change the course of history for thousands of families. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. The city of Chicago glittered 47 floors below. And Maria faced a decision that would haunt her for weeks to come. Her first instinct was to put the document back in the wastebasket and continue with her cleaning duties. She had worked too hard to build a stable life in America to risk it all on a situation that wasn't her responsibility. Elena was thriving in high school, earning excellent grades, and planning to apply to universities in the fall. Maria had finally saved enough money to move them from their cramped studio apartment to a small 2-bedroom place in a better neighborhood. She couldn't afford to lose her job, even if it meant staying silent about what she had discovered. But as Maria looked at the numbers on that crumpled report, she began to understand the true scope of what was happening at Meridian Financial. This wasn't just corporate theft. This was money stolen from pension funds that belonged to janitors, security guards, administrative assistants, and middle managers who had worked their entire careers believing their retirement savings were safe. This was money taken from investment accounts that belonged to teachers, nurses, and small business owners who had trusted Meridian to protect their financial future. Maria thought about her co-workers in the cleaning crew. Rosa Martinez, who had been working night shifts for 12 years to support her disabled husband and 3 children. James Washington, a veteran who cleaned offices to supplement his military pension. Sophie Chen, a college student who worked cleaning jobs to pay for her education without taking on debt. None of them knew that their jobs depended on a company that was being systematically robbed by its own executives. The document in Maria's hands showed that Meridian Financial had less than 60 days of operating capital remaining. If the theft continued undetected, the company would be forced to declare bankruptcy by early May. 15,000 employees would lose their jobs. Over 200,000 clients would see their retirement accounts frozen during a lengthy legal process. The economic impact would devastate families across 12 states. Maria had fled El Salvador to give her daughter opportunities that didn't exist in their home country. She had sacrificed her professional identity, her social status, and her sense of self-worth to build a safe, stable life in America. But now she was being asked to choose between her own security and the welfare of thousands of people who didn't even know she existed. As she stood in that empty office, Maria remembered a conversation she had with her father before leaving El Salvador. Roberto Santos had worked as a mechanic for 43 years, saving every possible dollar to send his children to university. On Maria's last night in San Salvador, he had told her something that shaped every decision she made afterward. Mija, education isn't just about getting a better job for yourself. It's about using your knowledge to help people who don't have the same opportunities. That's the real purpose of learning. Maria folded the audit report carefully and placed it in her pocket. She finished cleaning Marcus Crawford's office with the same meticulous attention to detail she had shown for over 3 years. But everything had changed. She was no longer just a cleaner going through her nightly routine. She was a financial analyst who had uncovered evidence of massive fraud, and she was the only person in a position to do something about it. When Maria's shift ended at 6 a.m., she didn't go home immediately. Instead, she sat in her car in the Meridian Financial parking garage and carefully read the audit report again. By the light of dawn streaming through the concrete structure, she began to understand the sophisticated nature of the embezzlement scheme. The report had been prepared by Hartwell and Associates, a respected forensic accounting firm that specialized in corporate fraud investigations. According to the document, Meridian's board of directors had hired Hartwell to conduct a routine audit in January 2023, following some minor irregularities that had been flagged by the company's external accountants. What Hartwell discovered was far more serious than anyone had expected. Their preliminary investigation had uncovered evidence of systematic financial manipulation dating back to early 2020. Money was being diverted from client accounts through a network of shell companies with legitimate-sounding names. Investment losses were being hidden through complex derivatives transactions that created the appearance of profitability while actually draining company resources. The report identified several red flags that should have been detected by Meridian's internal auditing systems. Unusual patterns of wire transfers to companies with no apparent business relationship to Meridian. Investment strategies that consistently underperformed market averages while generating substantial management fees. Accounting entries that violated standard financial reporting practices but had been approved by senior executives. Most significantly, the report noted that access to the financial systems used for these fraudulent transactions required executive-level authorization codes. This wasn't a case of a rogue employee stealing petty cash. This was systematic theft that could only be carried out by someone with the highest levels of access to Meridian's financial infrastructure. As Maria studied the technical details of the fraud, her professional expertise allowed her to see patterns that might not be obvious to someone without her background. The embezzlement scheme was brilliant in its sophistication, but it contained the same types of irregularities she had been trained to detect during her years as a financial analyst in El Salvador. But there was one detail in the report that made Maria's blood run cold. According to Hartwell and Associates, their investigation had been terminated abruptly in February 2023, just 3 weeks after it began. The termination notice had come from David Chen, Meridian's chief financial officer, who claimed that the audit was no longer necessary due to budget constraints. Maria realized that David Chen, the person responsible for terminating the fraud investigation, was likely the same person who had orchestrated the theft. The audit report she was holding had been buried because it contained evidence that would have exposed him. Marcus Crawford had thrown it away because Chen had convinced him it was outdated and irrelevant. By 7:30 a.m., as Maria finally drove home to her apartment, she had made a decision that would change her life forever. She was going to conduct her own investigation into the fraud at Meridian Financial. She was going to use her access as a night shift cleaner to gather evidence that could save the company and protect the jobs of 15,000 people. But Maria also knew that what she was planning was dangerous. If David Chen was willing to steal $47 million from his own company, he would certainly be willing to destroy the career and reputation of a cleaning woman who threatened to expose him. Maria would have to be careful, methodical, and completely invisible as she built a case that could withstand scrutiny from law enforcement and corporate investigators. The next phase of Maria's journey would test every skill she had learned as a financial analyst and every survival instinct she had developed as an immigrant building a new life in America. She was about to become a detective, gathering evidence of corporate fraud while maintaining the appearance of being nothing more than a dedicated cleaning woman who took pride in her work. For the next 2 weeks, Maria Santos lived a double life. During the day, She was a devoted mother helping Elena with college application essays and a dedicated employee who never missed a shift or complained about her working conditions. But during her night shifts at Meridian Financial, she became something else entirely. A forensic investigator methodically documenting evidence of one of the most sophisticated corporate fraud schemes in American business history. Maria's approach was careful and systematic. She couldn't afford to be caught accessing files or areas where she didn't belong. Instead, she had to rely on the evidence that came to her naturally through her cleaning duties. Executives routinely discarded draft reports, preliminary financial statements, and internal memos that contained fragments of information about the company's operations. What they didn't realize was that these discarded documents were being analyzed by someone with the expertise to understand their significance. On her second night of investigation, March 17th, Maria discovered a handwritten note in David Chen's wastebasket that contained account numbers for 3 offshore banking institutions. The note appeared to be Chen's personal reminder about upcoming wire transfers, written in a combination of English and Mandarin characters. Maria photographed the note with her cell phone and later used online translation tools to decipher the Chinese text, which contained references to investment consulting fees and management compensation. On March 20th, while cleaning the conference room where senior executives held their weekly strategy meetings, Maria found copies of investment reports that showed dramatically different performance numbers than the official statements being distributed to Meridian's clients. The discrepancy was subtle but significant. The internal reports showed consistent losses in several investment funds, while the client statements showed steady gains over the same time periods. By March 24th, Maria had compiled a folder of evidence that painted a clear picture of systematic financial fraud. But she also realized that her amateur investigation, while thorough, would not be sufficient to convince law enforcement or corporate authorities to take action against a respected executive like David Chen. She needed help from someone with legal expertise and the authority to launch a formal investigation. The problem was that Maria didn't know anyone in Chicago's legal or business community who would take her seriously. She was an undocumented immigrant working as a night shift cleaner. Her evidence consisted of photographs taken with her cell phone and documents retrieved from wastebaskets. Even if she could find a lawyer willing to listen to her story, there was no guarantee that anyone would believe her accusations against a Harvard-educated CFO with impeccable professional credentials. Maria decided that her best option was to present her evidence directly to Marcus Crawford. Despite his privileged background and apparent obliviousness to the expertise of his cleaning staff, Marcus had a reputation for integrity and concern for his employees' welfare. If Maria could convince him to take her accusations seriously, he would have the authority and resources to launch a proper investigation. But approaching Marcus Crawford presented its own challenges. Maria couldn't simply walk into his office during business hours and demand a meeting. Security protocols would prevent her from accessing executive floors during the day, and her lack of official credentials would make it easy for Marcus's assistants to dismiss her concerns as the complaints of a disgruntled employee. Maria realized that she would have to find a way to present her evidence that would be impossible for Marcus to ignore or dismiss. She needed to create a situation where he would be forced to listen to her, where the strength of her evidence would overcome any preconceptions about her credibility or qualifications. On March 28th, Maria learned that Meridian's board of directors had scheduled an emergency meeting for April 5th to discuss the company's declining financial performance. According to a memo she found in Marcus's office, the board was considering several drastic measures, including laying off 3,000 employees and selling the company's most profitable divisions to raise cash. Maria realized that this board meeting represented her best opportunity to present her evidence to the people who had the power to act on it. But she also knew that she would have only one chance to make her case. If she failed to convince the board members that her accusations against David Chen were credible, she would likely be fired and possibly face legal action for theft of confidential corporate documents. The plan Maria developed was risky, but it was the only strategy that gave her a realistic chance of saving Meridian Financial and protecting the jobs of 15,000 people. She would present her evidence to the board of directors during their emergency meeting, relying on the strength of her documentation and the urgency of the company's financial crisis to overcome any skepticism about her qualifications or motives. But before she could execute this plan, Maria needed to gather one final piece of evidence that would make her case absolutely convincing. She needed to document a direct connection between David Chen and the offshore accounts where Meridian's stolen money was being hidden. And she had exactly 1 week to find proof that would satisfy the board of directors and law enforcement agencies. What Maria didn't know was that David Chen had begun to suspect that someone was investigating his activities. The sophisticated accounting software he used to hide his theft included security features that logged every access to sensitive financial data. Chen had noticed unusual patterns of document access that didn't correspond to any authorized audit or investigation. He was starting to wonder if someone at Meridian was getting too close to discovering his carefully constructed fraud. The stage was set for a confrontation that would determine the fate of Meridian Financial and everyone whose livelihood depended on the company's survival. Maria Santos, armed with evidence of massive corporate theft, was preparing to risk everything she had built in America to protect people who didn't even know her name. And David Chen, facing the possibility that his 3-year embezzlement scheme might be exposed, was preparing to take whatever steps were necessary to protect himself from prosecution and disgrace. The next week would test the courage of a woman who had already sacrificed everything for her principles, and it would reveal the true character of men who controlled billions of dollars but had never been forced to account for how they used that power. The battle for the soul of Meridian Financial was about to begin. On the night of March 30th, Maria Santos made a discovery that would provide the final piece of evidence needed to expose David Chen's massive fraud. She was cleaning Chen's personal office, a task she performed every Wednesday and Friday, when she noticed that his computer had been left running with several applications still open. This was unusual. Chen was typically meticulous about computer security, always logging out of his systems and locking his office door when he left the building. But on this particular night, he had apparently been called away unexpectedly, leaving his workstation accessible for the first time in the 3 years Maria had been cleaning his office. Maria faced an impossible choice. Accessing Chen's computer would be a clear violation of her employment terms and potentially a criminal offense. If she were caught, she would certainly be fired and could face prosecution for corporate espionage. But the information on Chen's computer might contain the direct evidence of theft that she needed to convince the board of directors to take action. For several minutes, Maria stood frozen beside Chen's desk, knowing that this might be her only opportunity to gather conclusive proof of the embezzlement scheme. She thought about Elena, who was counting on her mother to provide stability and security. She thought about the 15,000 Meridian employees who had no idea their jobs were in jeopardy. She thought about her father's words about using education to help people who didn't have the same opportunities. At 12:43 a.m., Maria made a decision that would haunt her conscience but potentially save thousands of livelihoods. She approached Chen's computer and began documenting what she found on the screen. The computer displayed a sophisticated financial management application that Maria recognized from her days as a professional analyst. Chen had been using this software to track multiple investment accounts, including several that were registered to companies Maria had never seen mentioned in Meridian's official financial reports. One screen showed real-time balances for offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, Switzerland, and Singapore. The total amount in these accounts was over $53 million, far exceeding the $47 million that the Hartwell audit report had identified as stolen from Meridian. This suggested that Chen's theft had continued and accelerated in the weeks since the audit had been terminated. Another screen displayed a detailed schedule of upcoming wire transfers, including instructions for moving money from Meridian's client investment accounts to the offshore facilities Chen controlled. The transfers were disguised as legitimate investment management fees, but the amounts and destinations clearly indicated systematic embezzlement. Most significantly, Maria found email correspondence between Chen and associates at the offshore banking institutions, discussing strategies for avoiding detection by American financial regulators. The emails contained explicit references to concealing the source of transferred funds and maintaining plausible explanations for large cash movements. Maria used her cell phone to photograph every screen, knowing that this evidence would be impossible to dispute or dismiss. Unlike the documents she had retrieved from wastebaskets, this information came directly from Chen's personal computer systems and included real-time data about active financial crimes. But as Maria was photographing the final screen of evidence, she heard footsteps in the hallway outside Chen's office. Someone was approaching, and there was nowhere for her to hide. If Chen or a security guard discovered her accessing his computer, her investigation would end immediately, and all the evidence she had gathered would become worthless. Maria quickly closed the financial applications and moved away from Chen's desk, grabbing her cleaning supplies and pretending to dust the bookshelves along the far wall. The footsteps stopped outside the office door, and Maria heard the sound of a key being inserted into the lock. David Chen entered his office at 12:51 a.m., looking surprised to see Maria still working. "You're here late tonight," he said, his tone polite but slightly suspicious. "Is everything all right?" "Yes, sir," Maria replied, maintaining the deferential manner she had perfected over 3 years of night shift work. "I'm just finishing up. There was a coffee spill on your bookshelf earlier, and I wanted to make sure it was cleaned properly." Chen nodded and moved toward his desk, glancing at his computer screen to check whether anything had been disturbed. Maria continued dusting books, her heart pounding as she waited to see whether Chen would notice that his financial applications had been accessed. After what felt like an eternity, Chen sat down at his desk and began typing, apparently satisfied that his computer security hadn't been compromised. Maria finished her cleaning duties and quietly left the office, knowing that she had just gathered the most dangerous and valuable evidence of her investigation. Over the next 4 days, Maria refined her presentation for the board meeting. She organized her evidence chronologically, created a timeline of Chen's embezzlement activities, and prepared clear explanations of the financial techniques he had used to steal money while avoiding detection. Maria also made copies of all her evidence, storing them in multiple locations to ensure that the information couldn't be destroyed if Chen or his associates tried to cover up their crimes. She mailed copies to her daughter Elena, with instructions to contact the FBI if anything happened to Maria. She also left copies with Rosa Martinez, her friend from the cleaning crew, along with a letter explaining the significance of the documents. By April 4th, the day before the emergency board meeting, Maria had assembled a presentation that would expose the most sophisticated corporate fraud scheme in Meridian Financial's 70-year history. But she also knew that presenting this evidence would require her to reveal her own professional background and explain how a night shift cleaner had been able to detect financial irregularities that had escaped the attention of highly paid executives and auditors. Maria spent that evening with Elena, helping her daughter with homework and trying to maintain the appearance of normalcy despite knowing that the next day would change their lives forever. Elena noticed her mother's nervousness and asked if something was wrong at work. "Mija," Maria said, choosing her words carefully, "sometimes we have to do difficult things to protect people we care about. Tomorrow, I'm going to do something that might cause problems for us, but it's the right thing to do." Elena, who had inherited her mother's analytical mind and moral clarity, looked at Maria with understanding beyond her 17 years. "Mama, you've always taught me that education is about helping people. Whatever you're planning to do, I know it's because you want to help someone." That night, Maria barely slept. She reviewed her evidence one final time, practiced her presentation, and prepared for a confrontation that would determine whether justice would prevail or whether corporate corruption would continue to steal from working families who trusted their financial institutions to protect their life savings. At 9 a.m. on April 5, 2023, the Meridian Financial Board of Directors convened in the company's executive conference room on the 49th floor. The 12 board members, including Marcus Crawford and David Chen, gathered around a polished mahogany table to discuss the future of a company that employed 15,000 people and managed over $4 billion in client assets. The agenda was grim. Marcus Crawford presented financial reports showing that Meridian had lost over $200 million in the previous 6 months. Client withdrawals were accelerating as investors lost confidence in the company's performance. Stock prices had fallen to their lowest levels in 15 years. Without immediate action, Meridian Financial would be forced to declare bankruptcy within 60 days. Board member Elizabeth Harrison, who had served on the board for 12 years, asked the question that everyone was thinking: "Marcus, how did we get to this point? 6 months ago, our financial projections showed steady growth. What changed?" Marcus looked across the table at David Chen, relying on his CFO to provide explanations that would make sense of the company's catastrophic decline. Chen stood and began presenting charts and graphs that blamed the crisis on market volatility, increased competition, and regulatory changes that had affected the entire financial services industry. "The challenges we're facing are industry-wide, Chen explained with the confidence that had made him so trusted by Marcus and the board. Every major financial services company has struggled with similar issues. Our response needs to focus on cost reduction and strategic restructuring. Chen's presentation was polished and persuasive. He recommended laying off 3,000 employees, selling 2 profitable divisions, and consolidating operations to reduce overhead costs. The plan would keep Meridian solvent for another 18 months, giving the company time to recover from what Chen described as temporary market disruptions. But as Chen spoke, Maria Santos was making her way through the building's service corridors toward the executive floors. She had arrived at Meridian at 8:30 a.m., 2 hours before her normal shift, wearing her cleaning uniform and carrying a folder containing evidence that would expose Chen's lies and save the company he was systematically destroying. Maria's plan was simple but dangerous. She would enter the boardroom during a break in the meeting and present her evidence to the board members before Chen could stop her or have her removed by security. She would have perhaps 5 minutes to make her case before being escorted from the building. Everything depended on the strength of her evidence and her ability to convince powerful executives that a night shift cleaner had uncovered fraud that they had missed completely. At 10:15 a.m., as the board members took a 15-minute recess to discuss Chen's restructuring proposal, Maria approached the executive conference room. The boardroom door was partially open, and she could hear the directors debating the merits of massive layoffs versus selling company assets. Maria knocked softly on the door and entered the room before anyone could object to her presence. 12 of the most powerful executives in Chicago's financial district turned to stare at a woman they had never seen before, dressed in a cleaning uniform and carrying a manila folder. "Excuse me," Marcus Crawford said, clearly confused by the interruption. "This is a private board meeting. How did you get past security?" "Mr. Crawford," Maria replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart, "my name is Maria Santos. I clean your office every Tuesday night. I have information about why your company is losing money, and I believe you need to hear it before you vote on Mr. Chen's proposal." The room fell silent. Several board members looked annoyed by the interruption. David Chen's face had gone pale, and he was staring at Maria with an expression of growing alarm. "I'm sorry, but this is highly inappropriate," Chen said, moving toward the door as if to escort Maria out. "Security should have prevented this interruption. I'll call to have her removed immediately." "Wait," said Elizabeth Harrison, the veteran board member who had asked the difficult questions about Meridian's financial decline. Something in Maria's manner had caught her attention. "Before we have her removed, let's hear what she has to say. If she works here, she might have insights we haven't considered." Marcus Crawford nodded reluctantly. "You have 2 minutes," he told Maria. "Then security will escort you out, and we'll continue with our meeting." Maria opened her folder and placed the first document on the conference table. It was the audit report she had found in Marcus's wastebasket 3 weeks earlier, the report that David Chen had convinced him to discard as unreliable. "This is the Hartwell and Associates audit report that was commissioned in January," Maria began, her years of professional experience helping her maintain composure despite the hostile atmosphere. "It shows evidence of systematic embezzlement totaling over $47 million. Mr. Chen told you this report contained errors and should be ignored. But I believe the report is accurate, and I have additional evidence that supports its conclusions." David Chen stood up abruptly. "This is outrageous," he said, his voice rising. "This woman has obviously stolen confidential documents from our offices. She's probably working for a competitor, trying to damage our company's reputation. We should call the police immediately." But Elizabeth Harrison was studying the audit report, her expression growing more serious as she read the financial details. "Marcus," she said quietly, "have you seen this report before?" "David showed it to me briefly," Marcus replied, clearly uncomfortable with the direction the conversation was taking. He said it was an outdated draft that had been superseded by more accurate data. Maria placed her second piece of evidence on the table, photographs of the offshore account balances she had seen on Chen's computer screen. "These accounts contain over $53 million, she said. "The money came from Meridian client investments and employee pension funds. The accounts are registered to shell companies that Mr. Chen controls." The room erupted in shocked silence. Board members were staring at the photographs, trying to understand what they were seeing. David Chen was backing toward the door, his face flushed with panic and anger. "This is complete fabrication," Chen shouted. "She's obviously doctored these images. I demand that she be arrested for theft, fraud, and corporate espionage." But Maria wasn't finished. She placed her final piece of evidence on the table: printouts of the email correspondence between Chen and his offshore banking associates, discussing strategies for concealing stolen funds from American regulators. "These emails were sent from Mr. Chen's computer account," Maria said, her voice growing stronger as she saw the board members' expressions change from skepticism to shock to anger. "They contain explicit discussions about hiding stolen money and avoiding detection by financial authorities." Elizabeth Harrison stood up and walked around the table to examine the evidence more closely. After several minutes of careful review, she looked up at her fellow board members with an expression of barely controlled rage. "Marcus," she said, her voice ice-cold, "I think we need to postpone our restructuring discussion and call the FBI immediately. If this evidence is authentic, we're not dealing with market volatility or industry-wide challenges. We're dealing with the largest corporate theft in our company's history." David Chen made a desperate attempt to regain control of the situation. "You're going to believe the accusations of a cleaning woman over a Harvard-educated CFO," he demanded. "This is obviously a setup designed to distract us from making the difficult decisions necessary to save this company." But Marcus Crawford was studying the evidence with the analytical skills that had made him a successful business leader. The financial data was too sophisticated to be fabricated by someone without extensive training in forensic accounting. The email communications contained technical details about international banking that only a financial professional would understand. "Maria," Marcus said slowly, "how do you know how to interpret this financial data? This level of analysis requires professional expertise." For the first time since entering the boardroom, Maria smiled. "Mr. Crawford," she said, "I have a master's degree in international finance from Universidad Centroamericana. I worked as a senior financial analyst for 6 years before coming to the United States. I've been cleaning your office for 3 years, but that doesn't mean I've forgotten how to detect fraud." The revelation that a night shift cleaner possessed the exact expertise needed to expose the most sophisticated financial crime in Meridian's history left the board members speechless. They had spent months wondering how their company could be losing money so rapidly, never imagining that the solution to their crisis was emptying their wastebaskets every night. David Chen realized that his carefully constructed fraud had been exposed by the one person in the building whose intelligence and expertise everyone had completely underestimated. His 3-year embezzlement scheme, which had stolen over $50 million from working families, was about to collapse because he had never bothered to learn the name of the woman who cleaned his office. What happened next would determine whether justice would prevail or whether corporate corruption would continue to destroy the lives of innocent people who had trusted their financial institutions to protect their life savings. Within 30 minutes of Maria Santos's presentation to the Meridian Financial Board of Directors, FBI agents were on their way to the company's headquarters. Elizabeth Harrison, who served on the boards of 3 major corporations, had extensive contacts in federal law enforcement and had immediately called the Bureau's Financial Crimes Division. David Chen was arrested at 2:17 p.m. that same afternoon, as he attempted to leave Chicago on a private flight to Switzerland. Federal agents found over $3 million in cash in his luggage, along with falsified travel documents and account information for additional offshore banking facilities. The sophisticated nature of his escape plan confirmed that Chen had been preparing for the possibility of exposure for months. The investigation that followed revealed the true scope of Chen's embezzlement scheme. Over a period of 3 years and 2 months, he had stolen a total of $58 million from Meridian Financial. The money had come from client investment accounts, employee retirement funds, and the company's operational reserves. Chen had used the stolen funds to purchase luxury real estate in 5 countries, rare artwork, and high-end vehicles that he kept in private storage facilities. But the most significant discovery was that Chen had not been working alone. The investigation uncovered a network of accomplices at major financial institutions, including banks in Switzerland, Singapore, and the Cayman Islands, who had helped him launder the stolen money and avoid detection by American regulatory authorities. The conspiracy included executives at 3 other financial services companies who had been running similar embezzlement schemes with Chen's assistance. Marcus Crawford found himself in the unusual position of being both a victim of the fraud and a beneficiary of its exposure. The recovery of the stolen funds, combined with the elimination of Chen's ongoing theft, immediately improved Meridian's financial position. The company's stock price recovered 23% within a week of Chen's arrest, as investors regained confidence in Meridian's management and future prospects. But Marcus also had to confront the uncomfortable reality that he had been completely blind to both the theft that was destroying his company and the expertise of the employee who had saved it. Maria Santos had worked in his building for over 3 years, possessing exactly the skills needed to detect the fraud that was bankrupting his family's company, and he had never bothered to learn her name or background. The transformation in Marcus Crawford's leadership style was immediate and profound. Within days of Chen's arrest, he implemented new policies designed to recognize and utilize the talents of all Meridian employees, regardless of their job titles or educational backgrounds. He established mentorship programs for immigrant employees whose professional credentials weren't recognized in the United States. He created pathways for workers to transition into roles that matched their qualifications and experience. Most importantly, Marcus offered Maria Santos a position as senior financial analyst, with responsibility for fraud detection and prevention. The salary was more than triple what she had earned as a night shift cleaner, and the position came with full benefits, including tuition assistance for Elena's college education. Maria's decision to accept the position represented the completion of a journey that had begun 8 years earlier when she fled El Salvador to give her daughter a better future. For the first time since arriving in America, Maria would be working in her chosen profession, using her education and expertise to build the kind of career she had always dreamed of providing for Elena. But Maria's impact extended far beyond her own family's circumstances. Her courage in exposing Chen's fraud had saved the jobs of 15,000 Meridian employees and protected the retirement savings of over 200,000 clients. The families who depended on Meridian for their financial security had no idea that their livelihoods had been saved by a woman whose existence they had never acknowledged. Elena Santos, who had watched her mother sacrifice professional recognition and social status to provide stability and opportunity, finally understood the true meaning of courage and integrity. The daughter of a night shift cleaner had become the daughter of a senior financial analyst, but more importantly, she had learned that real success comes from using your talents to protect people who cannot protect themselves. 6 months after David Chen's arrest, Maria Santos was featured on the cover of Financial Analyst magazine as Fraud Detector of the Year. The article described her as the most unlikely hero in corporate America, a woman whose determination to do the right thing had exposed one of the most sophisticated embezzlement schemes in business history. But Maria's greatest satisfaction came from smaller, more personal victories. Rosa Martinez, her friend from the cleaning crew, was accepted into Meridian's new employee development program and began studying for her certified public accountant license. James Washington, the veteran who had worked multiple jobs to supplement his military pension, was hired as a security supervisor with benefits that allowed him to work only one job for the first time in 15 years. Marcus Crawford and Maria Santos developed a professional relationship based on mutual respect and shared commitment to protecting Meridian's employees and clients. Marcus learned to value perspectives from throughout the organization, while Maria found satisfaction in using her expertise to build something positive rather than just exposing problems. The story of Maria Santos and Marcus Crawford became a case study taught in business schools across the country, illustrating the importance of recognizing talent regardless of its source and the responsibility that comes with corporate leadership. But for the people involved, it was simply the story of what happens when someone with courage decides to speak truth to power, even when that power doesn't acknowledge their existence. Today, Meridian Financial is stronger than it has ever been in its 70-year history. The company has become a model for inclusive workplace practices and ethical corporate governance. Maria Santos continues to work as a senior analyst, protecting the company from the kind of fraud that almost destroyed it. Elena Santos is completing her junior year at Northwestern University, studying international business and planning to join her mother at Meridian after graduation. And somewhere in a federal prison, David Chen serves a 32-year sentence for corporate fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit financial crimes. His case established new precedents for prosecuting sophisticated white-collar criminals and led to stronger regulations designed to prevent similar schemes. The woman who was invisible for 3 years had become the most important person in a story that changed thousands of lives. Maria Santos proved that expertise and integrity are more powerful than privilege and position, and that sometimes the most unlikely heroes are the ones we need most. This is the true story of Maria Santos and Marcus Crawford. It's a story about courage and justice, about seeing people who have been invisible, and about the extraordinary things that happen when we finally start listening to voices that have been ignored for too long. If this story has inspired you, please share it with others. Leave a comment telling us about someone in your life whose talents deserve recognition. And remember that heroes don't always come from where we expect them. Sometimes they come from the people we pass in the hallway without seeing, the people we interact with every day without really knowing. Sometimes the person who can save everything is the person we never thought to notice.